The Locked On Podcast Network presents the Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast.
Jimmy Butler. We've got more stuff, more twists, more turns. The Heat announced a couple hours before tip-off that Jimmy Butler is going to be suspended not for 7 games, not for 2 games, but indefinitely after leaving Monday morning's shoot-around early after being informed that he was going to be coming off the bench and replaced in the starting lineup by Haywood Highsmith. So a lot of interesting things here. They announced it as a 5-game suspension at the very least, but make it clear that it's going to be indefinite. Now, what's interesting about those 5 games, David? It's literally the amount of games they had, starting with this Orlando Magic game, that they had until the trade deadline. So the Heat buying themselves some time here between now and the February 6th trade deadline by suspending him. We talked a lot for the Monday morning episode about what do you do with Jimmy Butler. And you and I agreed, you can't play this guy. Some way, shape, or form, you cannot play this guy anymore. He cannot be a part of this team. And by goodness, like the Heat figured out a way to make him not part of this team. He left shoot around early. I heard from players talking to people at the game. It wasn't like this big, it wasn't Minnesota.
All right.
It wasn't a big deal when it happened. He didn't kind of make a big, he just left. He was informed that he wasn't going to be in the starting lineup anymore, and he left. Still, that is technically against team rules, but the Heat are clearly looking for any and every reason to suspend Jimmy Butler, knowing that it's what's best for the team right now, and they went ahead and did that, and they did it indefinitely. This is, I don't know that the punishment meets the crime, but that's not the point here. The punishment has nothing to do with the crime. The punishment has everything to do with the trade request and what's best for the team on the court. This is what they decided to do.
I wonder if the intention was to play him, or if they knew that demoting him or removing him at least from the starting lineup would set him off the way they did, and it could kind of free their hands to say, well, hey, he just walked out of practice. He can't do that. Like that's, I don't know. I don't know how, if there were any kind of machinations or there was a thought process behind all this. You assume that they knew that he was going to be upset. I don't think at this point in time, Jimmy Butler would be like, oh, yeah, this is great. Yeah, bench me. I love this process.
Right. No, that's the part that I don't understand. Why would Jimmy be upset about this? Is he the only one that thinks he's actually giving effort? I know he tells the media that he's trying hard, but he knows that he's not trying hard because he's not doing it on purpose.
The level of pride that he has is so great. And I mean, the ego it takes to in order to be an NBA superstar at the level that Jimmy's been at for so long. You don't get to that point. Like, I mean, we've seen this as players age. They don't like demotions. They don't like being told they can't play as many minutes. Like, they think they can play at an all-star level throughout the entirety of their life, much less, a shortened career. And so they don't want to hear that. Like, I think Jimmy he believes in himself so completely that he really does think he could still be a game changer, even when he's clearly not been the player that we expect him to be.
But he doesn't want to be the game changer. That's like this guy gets clearly upset enough to leave shoot around early, knowing that this organization is looking for any and every reason to suspend you again, unless he's doing it on purpose now too. But I can't imagine that he's willingly wanting to lose millions of dollars. He's already lost $3 million this month.
He's going to get it back, right? In appeals.
He probably will, but it's still money deferred for a year. I'd rather have $3 million now than $3 million a year from now, maybe. Even if they have to give up, half. I mean, look, I know he'll be okay, but I can't imagine that he wanted to get suspended, in other words. But I don't know. He could. Who knows?
You got to put up a front on both sides. Like the team has to do what they can to kind of protect themselves and show, well, we're trying to set a bar here. We're trying to support players 2 through 15 here. We're doing everything we can. We gave him every opportunity. We just said, you know what? You've been a little bit of a distraction. We were going to bench you. That didn't mean we were going to not play you. or at least that's the
Unless
the
it did mean
report has
that
been.
we're not going to play you, and then
Well, it's possible. I'm
yeah.
sure the Spo could have come up with some excuse to say, "No, I didn't. I thought the guys out
We
in the
just couldn't
floor even when they were down
we couldn't
14.
find any minutes for Jimmy.
We couldn't find
We
any
we were
minutes."
losing. We were down 14 to the Orlando Magic, and we just still really couldn't find any
We
place
weren't
to
sure
put
about
Jimmy
his
Butler.
conditioning,
Right.
after the long
Yeah,
suspension.
it's
I'm sure they would have come up with some excuse or something like that. But it's just like, and
no,
from
the
his
point you
perspective,
made
he's like, he's got to be pissed off too. It's like, he's got to be able
sure.
to show I'm a competitor. I'm still a hooper. I want to be out there. And the fact that the team's not playing, but then he goes and posts something on social media where it's kind of tongue in cheek, and it's like,
Yeah,
it's
but
just it's silly. Yeah, the whole thing is just a little silly at this
well,
point.
I
But
think to your point before, though, like, did the Heat do this intentionally, knowing that they could maybe instigate this sort of reaction from Jimmy?
push
And
him over the edge. Yeah.
yeah, and I think they are pushing and prodding him. And when he left the shoot around early, the sense I get is they were like, all right, cool, another reason for us to get to suspend this guy. Very important too that this team does not have any national TV games between now and the trade deadline. So that's sort of what allows you to go from a definite type of span on the suspension, whether it's 6 games or 7 games or 2 games, to indefinite because they don't have another. So this buys them time. This is clearly a move aimed at the trade deadline. This buys him time. Jimmy cannot get hurt because he's not playing, and he's not going to be with the team so that the team can focus between now and the deadline on what happens. Now, if for whatever reason Jimmy Butler is still on the team after the trade deadline, you have a meeting and you say, okay, how do we handle it then? But for now, that's the can kicked as far down the road as possible, and that's essentially what the Heat just did here. We do have some more news here. Bradley Beal got some reporting during this game from Fred Katz over at The Athletic, reported that Bradley Beal will not accept a trade to the Chicago Bulls. He says, quote, there are destinations Beal would consider approving. As The Athletic reported last week, going to a winning team would be his first priority. However, cold weather cities, including Chicago, are less attractive to him, the source said. If a team has a losing record and a chilly winter, it won't be on Beal's list. Of course, this complicates the Suns' pursuit of Butler. This is the luxury you have when you have a no-trade clause, David. He's like, I don't like that weather. It gets below 40 for too many months out of the year. That's off my list. That's the luxury that Bradley Beal has with the no-trade clause. He is not going to waive that no-trade clause. And this removes the Chicago Bulls as a potential suitor that can land Bradley Beal in a 4 or 5 team mega trade that brings Jimmy Butler to Phoenix and relief to the Miami Heat. So
we just got snow in the Panhandle. There's no place that's free of the cold winters, Bradley. You got to waive it for some team. I don't know. I mean, like, I get it, but that just basically means I don't know. I don't think they can send Jimmy to his preferred destination of the Phoenix Suns. Like, they're going to have to find another place that might be willing to.
Yeah, I mean, even before, I'm sorry, but before we even get to that point, and you're right, maybe, perhaps, but like, what's now? Okay, before we get to that, what's the team that meets Bradley Beal's criteria? To be clear, I think he would be, at least according to the verbiage in this report, willing to go to a cold weather team as long as that team was winning at a high level. And the first team that comes to mind is Milwaukee, but Milwaukee already came out here and said, we're not interested in you, Bradley Beal. So I don't know where Bradley Beal is trying to, I don't know if he's got a list of preferred destinations. He's got obviously preferred destinations. It's been reported that he might be willing to waive his no trade clause to go to a winning situation. But what's the winning situation, cold or not cold, that makes any sense for Bradley Beal? I can't find that. And if it's going to be a losing team, but at least it's warm, I mean, are we talking about Charlotte? Like, what are we talking about here? I mean, is he trying to get it to the Atlanta Hawks, perhaps? Like, that's a fringe playoff team in the East with warmish weather. I mean, my brother lives in Atlanta. It was snowing there, too, so I don't know if that counts. But, like, that's the part that I don't understand here. It's not a lot of options, Brad. Sorry. Is he trying to get to Miami? Orlando?
Trying to get to Orlando? I mean, they could sure use the shooting, I suppose, but they don't have a place for him on that roster.
No,
I mean, I
don't Bradley Beal.
Yeah, no, they don't want to commit that kind of cap space to a player.
So
like
that's
that.
so that's where we end up with what you said before. It very much complicates Jimmy Butler getting to where he wants to go. And so I think this is a situation where you look at the other teams that could potentially be in the market for Jimmy Butler, and the Heat might have to start talking to those teams a little bit more if they're not already.
And look to him to exercise his option next year and pick up that $50 million, because none of the teams that he's going to get traded to, they're looking at him as just a 1.5 year rental, and You get an extra year. You can compete this year. You can contend this year if you're a team like, say, the Memphis Grizzlies.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if you can take on Jimmy Butler's salary, you figure it out. And then you kind of accept that he'll probably opt in next year, and he's not going to get the extension he wants. So he's not going to get it from Miami. He's not going to get it from Phoenix unless they work out some trade over the summer. Again, what we've talked about from Miami's perspective, oh, well, maybe you can look into a trade this summer. Well, maybe, but that would be falling on some other front office to have to negotiate that kind of deal with Phoenix, and who knows what'll play out then. But it doesn't seem likely that he's going to get the deal that he wants. And, well, as far as Miami's concerned, that's not their problem anymore. They've made it clear that they don't have a future with Jimmy Butler. Jimmy doesn't want a future with Miami, and so you move them to wherever you can. Now, look, I see a lot of comments, and I just want to address this really quickly because I see a lot of comments saying, "Oh, this is Pat Riley still kind of sleeping at the wheel, or he's not. Why isn't he getting this done?" Because it's not his choice. He'd trade him to goddamn Timbuktu if he had the option, but he doesn't. Who's going to take on that $50 million salary? There aren't teams that want Jimmy Butler, and you have to, you have to understand that. Like the deal isn't there. And if the only deal that's really been available, or the one that they've explored the most often, is a deal to Phoenix, well, that all hinges on Bradley Beal, and Bradley has all the options in the world, and he can say no to any one of them. And he just doesn't, he doesn't choose to want to go to Chicago, Milwaukee, or anywhere else. And you have to get buy-in from both other teams, those players. And it's not something that Miami's just like kind of sitting on their thumbs and not doing anything. They're trying to actively shop him, but there isn't much of a market. They didn't expect that they'd have to be forced into this midway through the season. Their expectation was, as we talked to Tim Bontemps of ESPN last week, they thought they were going to have that play out over the course of the season, and then they were going to find a way to negotiate over the summer and see what happens. Well, that no longer is a reality. Right. So,
and naively so, might I add, but that's where they end up being. And to your point, you're like, to make it the Heat are aggressively engaged in the trade market.
They don't want to deal with this.
I don't know what could make it more clear that this team does not want Jimmy Butler on the roster anymore. They are actively engaged in the trade market, trying to find anything. I think they would like to send Jimmy Butler to Phoenix because that sends Jimmy Butler. It has nothing to do with honoring his trade destination. It just sends him to the other conference. And frankly, a team that you're not going to have to worry about ever seeing in the NBA Finals. Because the Suns with Jimmy Butler, they're not making it that far either. And so I think that's sort of like, hey, you kind of exile him off to this island in Phoenix, and we don't have to worry about this anymore. And but I also think that it doesn't make sense for any of the other teams that could be even a little interested in Jimmy Butler to put forward their best offer right now. Why would for the record, Memphis, despite Jimmy Butler making it clear that he does not want to get traded there, that noise has not gone away. The Milwaukee Bucks, that noise has not gone away. There have been several constructions involving the Chicago Bulls. Some of them, there have been several constructions involving the Chicago Bulls that have been talked about. And I don't know that noise had not gone away as of Monday afternoon. And I don't know what happens now after the Fred Katz report comes out. But that noise was as recent as anything else. So there are plenty of teams that are willing to get engaged in this stuff. I do still wonder if Memphis or Milwaukee would be interested in Jimmy Butler for different reasons. But we'll see how it plays out. But it doesn't make sense for those teams to put their best offer forward, because I know it feels like the trade deadline is right around the corner. But a week in the NBA is a very long time for things to change. And a team is not going to put their best offer forward a week before the trade deadline. The only team that's actively putting their best offer forward right now is Phoenix, because they want Jimmy Butler in that building as soon as possible, because they believe that he can make them better. And they need to stack up wins in the Western Conference to try to make the playoffs here. But for Memphis, for Milwaukee, they're not going to have to do it. And Miami knows that too. And so this thing probably will go right down to the deadline.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy. Used to go to comedy shows all the time. Me and my friends in college used to go all the time. It's a blast. You don't even need, alcohol. You just go and have fun and laugh. It's a comedy show. That's the whole point. Just go have fun. Gametime has a new called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
The Dallas Cowboys introduce Brian Schottenheimer as their next head coach.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast.
There's a lot of nonsense that we'll get to in a little bit, but let's start with just Schottenheimer talking. What were some of your big takeaways coming out of that press conference?
I mean, I think you got to see a good look at exactly, who Brian Schottenheimer is and what kind of leader he is and how he commands the room. I think this is a guy that, there's a reason that we have been speaking in the way we have about the guy the last, few days. And, we have talked a lot about the process of him being hired. We'll talk about it a little bit more. But when we talked about Brian Schottenheimer, we talked about the fact that we felt like he's qualified to do this job. He's qualified. We can talk about whether he's the best candidate or whether he's the kind of candidate the Cowboys need right now. But as far as being an NFL head coach, he commands the room. He understands what he wants to do. He has a vision for the team. He's confident. He has a lot of familiarity with the players in this locker room, as shown by the fact that a bunch of them showed up to this press conference today. So I think, as far as first impressions of a head coach go, I really like that he, took a block of time up front to thank a bunch of people. I think that served as a really great kind of introduction to who he was for folks that maybe haven't seen him in interviews or just over the years. So I think you saw an example of a guy who's a football lifer who has been in the league for a long, long time, despite only being 50 years old. I think, we predicted that Cowboys fans would see a lot of why the Cowboys wanted to hire Brian Schottenheimer when he did this press conference, because this is kind of one of the more impressive parts of Brian Schottenheimer. And I do think that we saw a guy that, looks the part for sure. And now the question becomes, like, how does he build his roster? How does the team look? How does the team respond to him? That's going to find out next.
I thought he impressed. And again, that's where we thought he would. He is a very good public speaker. He does a really good job of connecting with players. I wish we could have heard more from Schottenheimer on what his scheme was going to be. We did get to some of that, and I want to touch on that, but I wanted to hear about
Patrick Walker, by the way.
I wanted to hear some thoughts on how does he view analytics? What does he think of going forward on fourth down and certain game situations rather than some of the other nonsense we heard? But some of the key words that he said that I liked was talked about more shifts and more motions, and how he thinks the current batch of players that he has right now does really well when they play with tempo and that they don't have to go out there and think so much. So he said a lot of things if you were worried about what this offense was going to look like, I think those should encourage you. So I thought that part of the press conference was really insightful.
Yeah, frankly, the way he responded to Patrick Walker's question is honestly, we could do a whole podcast on that whole section of just the talk about the use of splits and motions to muddy up the look for the defense. And I think, that is those are important keywords for Cowboys fans that are trying to figure out what this offense is going to look like, because that is something that has been missing from this offense. Yeah. So I think that that was really, really reassuring to hear those words. And then I think we should have a whole conversation about the tempo aspect of, because I think, first of all, tempo was one of the few things that this offense did well almost the entire season. When they played with tempo, they moved the ball pretty consistently. And there were definitely different points during the season in which you and I even called for them to use tempo more regularly, because it was seemingly very successful when they were getting in and out of plays and not having to overthink things. It felt like they moved the ball really well. So I think reading between the lines there a little bit, and I kind of want to go back and rewatch that part of the press conference one more time. It felt like that was maybe a point of contention between McCarthy and the players and or Schottenheimer, is the lack of use of tempo, or the fact that the team wanted to use tempo. So that really kind of caught my ear rather, when they said that, and just the way that was all being phrased and the way that Schotty kind of harped on tempo there. I think that's kind of where I'm looking for right now is where are the lines of delineation between the previous era of Cowboys and Schottenheimer? Where are there going to be changes? I think that's those areas that we just mentioned, motion, splits, tempo. These are all things that you're seeing more and more of or being leveraged more and more in modern offenses. And the hope is that the Cowboys are going to start trying to modernize this offense a little bit by adding those elements into it.
Yeah, in terms of tempo, I think like Mike McCarthy this year had to do a little bit of a balancing act, not trying to use too much tempo because his defense was just shattered with injuries, right? But I do think like in 2023, when they were healthy on defense and they had a defense that was creating a bunch of turnovers, maybe that's when they could have used some more tempo. So from that standpoint, again, I'm very encouraged by what I heard from him. One of the other takeaways I saw or heard him talk about was getting under center and using more play action and becoming a better play action team. I think he talked about how they need Dak to be more fit. They want Dak to be under center more so they can use the play action game, and that should help the running game as well. Again, everything he said about the X's and O's stuff, I was impressed by.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what we were hoping to hear from him, right? So we'll see, again, how that actually translates once we get into training camp, once we get into the regular season, obviously. But right now, at least the vision is correct and where we want to go. I like the direction that they're headed, and I hope that they kind of continue to follow through on that, because I do think that if that's what we're signing up for is just a kind of refresh, updated version of this offense with just more modern principles kind of, sprinkled in so that you can gain that extra edge. I think that that's something I can buy into offensively, and it certainly goes a long way in making me feel better about the play calling aspect of this whole situation.
The last thing I want to say on Schottenheimer before we move on is I do think it's important to grit your teeth and watch this press conference, because I'm seeing some quotes on Twitter like, I don't love the new head coach saying that X's and O's don't matter. Well, if you watched it, that's not what Brian Schottenheimer was saying. He was saying that the players matter and the relationship matters. And he thinks of it more as players rather than plays, right? Like, how do we get CeeDee Lamb? And again, I'm paraphrasing this, but like, how does he get CeeDee Lamb the ball on a 3rd and 7, right? How do I make sure that my best players are getting touches? We see an Eagles team that I don't think is overly great in terms of their scheme. They scored 55 points yesterday because they have some outstanding talent, and the offensive coordinator knows how to use those talents. I think what Brian Schottenheimer was trying to say there, like, hey, we're going to adjust our X's and O's based on our talent, rather than saying, hey, here's our scheme and you better fit into it.
Yeah, I tend to think that, in general, I understand why Cowboys fandom is upset with the Joneses. Absolutely every right to be. But don't let that anger at the Joneses leak over to Brian Schottenheimer, who only wanted to have a head coaching job in the NFL and one of the better ones at that. So let's give Schotty a chance here to kind of prove himself or not prove himself, and try to separate that whole situation from maybe poor process by the Joneses of hiring him in the first place.
Takeaways from the first day of a new era of Jets football.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast.
Well, the Jets introduced their new head coach and new general manager today. It was the introductory press conference for Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji. And I think it's fair to say they both came off very well. It's the easiest thing in the world to do, or it should be the easiest thing in the world to do, to win the introductory press conference. This is the least important thing that either Glenn or Muji will do during their respective Jets tenures. This is a day full of pomp and circumstance, a day with a lot of pageantry. It's very symbolic. It's the team turning the page, looking to a future that they hope will be brighter. And you hear a lot of big picture stuff. I think if you take the introductory press conferences of most head coaches and most general managers, a lot of what they say is very boilerplate. You hear the same stuff about building the team the right way. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how well you do in your introductory press conference. Adam Gase did a terrible job in his introductory press conference, and he was a bad coach for the Jets. Dan Campbell did a terrible job at his introductory press conference with the Lions 4 years ago, ended up being a great coach. Robert Saleh did a very good job 4 years ago at his introductory press conference with the Jets, and he was a bad coach. Rex Ryan was the ultimate winner of his press conference and did a good job. So there's no real rhyme or reason to, there's no connection between how well you do in your press conference and how good of a coach you are. It's really just about giving first impressions. And sometimes you hear a comment or two that gives you real insight into the way somebody thinks. Well, this press conference began with Woody Johnson speaking, and I'll say this: Woody Johnson did make a reference to the fact I need to be a better owner, and Woody offering any sort of self-reflection, no matter how cursory it is, no matter how short it is, no matter how believable it is. I'm going to call that a win. And then Woody Johnson, he spoke for a few minutes. There's something that was really weird to me is he started talking about the importance between the relationship between the head coach and the GM and how the head coach lays out the vision and the GM needs to understand the type of players you want to get. It sounded almost exactly like what I was saying in the segment last week. Maybe my mind's playing tricks on me. It wasn't just boilerplate stuff. It was he was saying the exact same things I said last week when I talked about the importance of the relationship between the coach and the GM. So it's weird to it's weird for me to agree with Woody Johnson. In fact, go back and listen to that segment and then listen to what Woody said. Am I making this up? I doubt Woody was listening and then said, well, I'm just going to say exactly that. But man, that was a weird moment for me. Although it's part of the reason it was weird. It was what Woody Johnson was saying was actually making sense. But then Darren Muji and Aaron Glenn spoke. And as I mentioned last week, I think their partnership, not just how good they are at their jobs, but how well they work together is critical. Because you see it on the field. You see it with players. You can have the most talented roster in the league, but if the players don't work well together, if the pieces don't fit, your team's not going to win. I think the same is true of the head coach and general manager relationship. They need to be on the same page. They need to understand what each of them needs from each other. The GM needs to understand the types of players the coach wants. The coach needs to develop the players the GM gets. It's a very important relationship. You can have a guy who's a great talent evaluator. You can have a guy who's a great head coach. But if they don't work well together, the team's not going to have big success. And look, you can't come away definitively thinking two guys are going to work well together based on a couple of anecdotes from a press conference. But Muji talked about when he was with Denver, and when the Broncos had a coaching opening a few years ago, they interviewed Glenn. And they talked about how Glenn blew them away. Glenn was just so passionate that he commanded the room. And then he mentioned one thing that I'm probably the only one who noticed this. He talked about how when he interviewed for the Jets GM job, he was in Glenn's office. And that was music to my ears because that showed me that Aaron Glenn actually had some input into this hire, that this was not like when the Jets hired, Todd Bowles and Mike McCagnon, and they just kind of ran these two parallel searches with these guys who weren't really interested in working with each other. The fact that Glenn was part of this, I think was a positive. And it shows that, they'll be able to, at least there's some commonalities there. And, what Muji said about Glenn commanding the room, 9 times out of 10, I would say, well, if Glenn was so great, why didn't you hire him? It's very easy to pay lip service to somebody. But in that search, the Broncos hired Sean Payton, the Super Bowl winning coach. So when you hire a coach of that pedigree and you pass on Glenn for that, I actually do believe what Muji said about Aaron Glenn. And it's going to be critical that these guys work well together. Now, the Jets announced a change to their reporting structure. Both Muji and Glenn will report directly to Woody Johnson. And that's a change because nominally, at least, Robert Saleh reported to Joe Douglas, and then Joe Douglas reported to Woody Johnson. Of course, over this last year, Woody Johnson kind of bulldozed that arrangement, and Woody took total control of the franchise. And if you've been listening to the show, I'm not really wild about the idea of both the head coach and the GM reporting to Woody because, my concern with this franchise has always been divide and conquer with the owner. But I think last year kind of shows you how sometimes the nominal structure isn't that important because in theory, Joe Douglas was supposed to be in charge of the team last year and Woody Johnson still took control and, dominated everybody. So it's less important to me that, both of these guys report directly to Woody Johnson. It's more important that they're just on the same page because where the Jets fall into trouble is when the head coach and the GM disagree and then Woody becomes the tie-breaking vote. That's become an enormous area of pitfalls for the Jets through the years, in addition to other areas where the owner is too hands-on. But if there's alignment, if these guys work well together, if, again, Glenn lays out his vision, Glenn sets the overall culture. And, if you saw that press conference, again, there's only so much you can take from the press conference, but Aaron Glenn has a chance to be a culture-changing coach. I'm not going to say he's going to be based on a few comments at the press conference, but you can see how he gets people fired up. You can see the presence he has, the way he commands the room. If he sets that culture and he communicates well with Muji, and Muji's good at identifying the types of players who are fits for the Jets. And when I say fits for the Jets, I mean, do they have the attributes needed to run Aaron Glenn systems? But I also mean, are these guys who are going to be the type of players you bring in to build a strong locker room culture? Are these going to be the types of guys who work hard? Are these going to be the types of guys who don't make excuses? That's what's important. It's not so much the nominal structure of the organization, because last year the Jets had a different nominal structure. The Jets actually, in theory, had a structure where the GM was in charge, but in reality, he wasn't. And things didn't work very well. So I heard what I wanted to hear. It's one thing to say you're going to work well together. It's one thing to say you're going to work well together before there's been the potential for any conflict, before there's been the potential for any problems. When the rubber actually hits the road, when you hit a rough patch, that's when we'll find out how well these guys work together. But what I was really listening for was, first of all, the fact that the idea that there was a rapport between these two guys. And two, the idea that Glenn was involved in the hiring of the GM. That the Jets were thinking about this, that the Jets were going to make sure that the GM and the head coach were on the same page, that at least on paper, these guys can work well together. So for me, that was a really positive development. I might be the only one who picked up on that, but I think that was actually a really critical thing to listen for. And I heard what I wanted to hear.
Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. The one bet you could look at, $5 on the NBA tonight. The Lakers head east to play the Sixers. FanDuel likes LeBron and company and has LA favored by 4 in Philly. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus. FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59.
You are Locked On Rockets Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Houston on the Locked On Podcast Network.
I mean, there's so much good here. There's a lot. This team goes out there tonight, and early on, it was very similar to their game the other night against the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I'm telling you right now, we're watching this team really grow up to another level in front of our eyes. They've gone on the road now. Think about this. They've gone on the road. They played the top 2 seeds in the East. And they've beaten them both in their place. And they beat the top seed in the East at their place in the game before. So they've beaten 1-2-2 or 1-1-2 in their last 3 games. That's pretty darn good. You really think about what this team has done since the last time they played Boston. They've won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of 11. 9 of 11 since that game where they lost 109-86. And tonight, I really felt like, again, this was a team that went out there and, they got punched a little bit early. Boston came out firing. I've loved something that I've loved from the last 2 games is that, the energy. You could really feel the energy in both buildings, in Cleveland and there tonight in Boston. Playoff type of atmospheres. And this team has passed the test in those kind of atmospheres. The moment wasn't too big for them. Do things get tight at times, and did they slip up at times? And were there moments of the game where it's kind of like, oh gosh, here's the offensive issues this team is presented with quite consistently based off of what they have. But what do good teams do in these moments? They find their way to wins. They grind it out as best as they can. And look, tonight, if you had sat down today and kind of spelled out how this game goes in a scenario where the Rockets win, you would probably said, well, that means Jalen Green probably came out and had a really good shooting night. Alpy probably did some really good stuff. And the other guys kind of do what they typically do. Never in your life would you say, well, Dylan Brooks is going to go for 36 and knock down 10 3-pointers. Amin Thompson is going to go for a career-high 33. I mean, you would have expected really good out of him because he's been awesome, but I wasn't expecting a career-high 33 tonight and 10 rebounds and 4 assists. Did he have a block shot? And a block shot. And he only missed 6 shots from the field. And he knocked down a 3. And he knocked down 6 of 8 from the line. All of that happened tonight for this team. And then, oh, by the way, Alpi, not a good night. Jalen Green, buns. Absolute buns in terms of his game tonight. And the Rockets walk out of there with a 114-112 victory. Keys to it, go look at it. Didn't turn the ball over. 7 turnovers tonight. Actually got beat in the rebounding department by 2. But points off of turnovers. Celtics had 15. They capitalized on 21 of them. They got out. They set the pace. I just thrilled with the effort tonight. Thrilled with the attention to detail. Thrilled with the meeting the moment. Meeting the atmosphere. That, again, is a sign to me that we are watching a team blossom at a rapid pace. At a very rapid pace. And then they also do it, look, for their coach. Now, was his leaving over there self-inflicted? Of course it was self-inflicted. He's admitted to that. He's talked about it. He made mistakes. That's why he's not the coach there anymore. He would have still been the coach there if all that stuff had not gone on. He's here now. And now he finally gets to beat them. Had not beaten them since joining the Rockets. Gets that win. You know that has to feel pretty good tonight to get that victory. And look, it's an important one too. Not only is it about the making a statement and reminding everybody that, yeah, this isn't a fluke. Look, the Rockets are in a West that's still, I've said it. I think that they're only teams that are going to compete with them for that top seed, that second seed, is going to be Memphis and Denver. I do mean disrespect to the Lakers and the Clippers. I don't think that they're real. I think those are the only 2 teams that can hang around. And I don't even necessarily think that Memphis can do it. And look, the Rockets also have the tiebreaker over Memphis. They're good, but I just don't think that they're as good as the Rockets. All these wins matter. And then on top of it, doing it against good teams, really good teams, matters even more. It's a huge confidence booster for this team. I don't think that they're lacking in confidence. They wouldn't be winning all these games if they didn't have confidence. But they did so much tonight. And then to have, again, one of the guys who carried you all night long get a chance to knock it down. And look, Amin Thompson's range is not very far at all. It was just within his range, thank goodness. And he knocked it down. And we are watching the moment of a career happen in front of us where he's going to that next level. He is ascending rapidly, and his status in this league is only going to continue to rise. And boy, oh boy, as I always say, if he could ever knock down an outside shot consistently, this man is going to be, he's already going to be one of the better players in the NBA. He would be one of the best, without a doubt, top tier talents in this league if he could do that on a consistent basis. I can't be picky. He might not be that guy. That's okay. What he's doing right now, insanely effective, insanely good. And he did it again tonight. Let's talk about him. Let's give some more praise to him and to Dylan Brooks. Dylan, the villain. A lot of people hate him. I was always skeptical of him when he landed over here with the Rockets just because of the personality and what we've seen with him in Memphis. But man, he really is a key cog to this team, and he is not getting enough love this season for what has gone on out there on the floor for this Rockets basketball team and how they performed.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy. I used to go to comedy shows all the the time me and my friends in college used to go all the time. It's a blast. You don't even need, alcohol. You just go and have fun and laugh. It's a comedy show. That's the whole point. Just go have fun. Gametime has a new called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
The New York Knicks annihilate the Memphis Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast.
Arguably the Knicks' best win of the season. I would call it, at the very least, their most complete. I would probably, take that next step and call it their best win of the year against a Memphis Grizzlies team that we were just talking about at pre-show. One of 5 teams in the NBA coming into tonight with a better record than the New York Knicks. Top 10 offense, top 10 defense, been hovering around top 5 in those two categories all season, and the Knicks absolutely demolished them. A 37-point victory, 143-106. Knicks score over 140 for the second straight game. First time doing that since 1965. 2 of the top 15 scoring performances in Knicks history, and they come back-to-back. They set a season high with 52 bench points, a season high with 31 points in transition, nearly a team record with 20 steals, only 2 off on that total. Just a ridiculous effort. Memphis made it kind of competitive at times in the second half. It was one of those games where it felt like the Knicks were playing nearly perfect and should have been up way more at halftime than they were. But basically put this game away with a 16-0 run in the third quarter in under 3 minutes. Some Mikal transitions, some cat layups, capped by back-to-back Brunson threes. And then in the fourth, when Memphis cut it to 16, 6 straight points from Campaign, a Mikal 3, 11-0 run. Good night, Grizzlies. Just an epic second half, an epic performance for the New York Knicks.
Yeah, and anytime you have to go beyond, I feel like this should be like a rule of thumb, for Knicks achievements. If you have to go past the 1970 championship team to find any statistical anomaly, you're doing something pretty freaking good. Because normally those are the standard bearers. We keep hearing about Clyde's triple-double record and, the last time that 2 Knicks made the all-star starters at the same time, all this stuff. Usually everything's held by those 70s teams. So the fact that they did something that even those teams didn't do is crazy to think about, because they're the gold standard, the golden age of the Knicks for good reason. So, I mean, this team, they're starting to find their way. I feel like, I think I've noticed that, and I mean, we're going to talk about how good the bench was in a little bit, but I've noticed, I think my biggest trend from these 2 games is that Tibbs is trusting that bench more, and it's allowing the starters. I mean, we've talked about, I know it's been a very polarizing topic, very, you're either very much on one side or very much on the other in like the discourse around this team. But you and I were kind of the opinion, like, I think this team's getting a little rundown. Maybe they're not like super rundown, but like you could see it in certain performances where they seem to have dead legs and whatever. These last 2 games, they have that nice long layoff in between games to get their stuff together, get their bodies right, whatever. They come out in that Kings game and just run them off the floor. And then they come out and do the same thing in this game and just run these guys off the floor. And the Grizzlies are a team that loves to run. So, like, the fact that the Knicks were able to outrun them, I think speaks volumes about where their energy level is at right now, how all the guys are feeling. I mean, OG Anunoby, 7 stocks in this one again, back to his true form there. I mean, you had like everybody that touched the floor recorded a steal in this game, it feels like. So, there's plenty of them to go around, but like everybody getting those hustle plays, those hustle stats. Just a beautiful game to watch if you're a Knicks fan. Obviously, Grizzlies fan, maybe not so much, but I want to give props. Like, I don't always agree with his style of analysis, but I really liked Alan Hahn's stat that he pulled at the pregame for MSG, which was, he pointed out that the Grizzlies were one of the more turnover-prone teams in the NBA, and that the Knicks had snuck into top 5 in points off turnovers in recent weeks in the whole NBA. So the Knicks really took advantage of a team that does not take great care of the ball. and managed to just absolutely run crazy on them. Really turn every possible opportunity into transition points. And I just loved even not off of steals and stuff, even off rebounds, just like Mikal Bridges with his head up, just looking to throw it the whole court, or Mikal Bridges running and cherry picking, down the other end, and knowing like, hey, the second that this ball gets in someone's hands, I should already be released and going towards the other end, because this team is apparently not great in transition defense either. In addition to not being great taking care of the ball, but just all in all, a fantastic effort all around for the Knicks, and just a really balanced game. Like, that was the best part about it. They scored all those points, but they weren't overly reliant on the starters to totally carry them. It was just the whole team got involved and everybody had their moment.
Yeah, and this is the only caveat. I'll put on it all night, and then it'll be all just incredibly effusive from here. Like, I think this was about as bad as the Grizzlies could play. Like, even when it wasn't the Knicks playing great defense, they were throwing the ball all over the court. Didn't really pick on Cat in pick and roll the way you would expect them. But I thought Cat played a pretty good game, and a big part of it, which we'll get into more next segment, was that I thought Mikal just had an exceptional effort on Ja Morant that was reminiscent of what he did against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the first half of the first Oklahoma City game. And then he just continued it throughout. But this is, I don't know if we did a good enough job driving it home, but this is sort of a season defining stretch for the Knicks. Like coming into this West Coast road trip, right? They had been the epitome of a mediocre basketball team in January. They were 6-6, a 0.0 net rating in that time. And all season long, Alex, like I give credit to James Edwards over at The Athletic, like pulled this stat. They were coming into these last two games 13-15 against the top 10 seeds in both conferences. I didn't realize it was that bad. They were under 500 against playoff and play-in teams. They were 17-1 against the bottom 6 seeds, which of course was very similar to their profile a year ago, but ultimately concerned. It was like, all right, can they not only like scrape out wins against some of the best teams in the NBA, can they dominate some of the best teams in the NBA? They've done it against the Wolves early this year. They did it against the Nuggets before the Nuggets ultimately started to figure things out. And now you play a Kings team that coming in had won 10 out of 12. You wreck them. Memphis, I was even a little low on them. 5th in offensive rating, 6th in defensive rating. I mean, just absolutely the profile of a championship team. And the Knicks wrecked them. They like from minute one, even though it was close on the scoreboard, like this was a annihilation, as Mike Breen put it. I think that is the best possible term for it. I'm with you. Like I thought the transition was revelatory. It felt closer to preseason, where I don't know how much you remember this. Like it was just Mikal, Hart, and Brunson looking like they hadn't missed a step, and those three connecting over and over and over again. And you said it, like this was just a redux of that. Like with Mikal streaking down the court, OG had one where he ran ahead of everyone for a dunk, and it just sort of felt like Memphis did not have any kind of answer on either end. Totally complete performance, total butt kicking. And if you were like me and you were feeling a little bit pessimistic about this team, shows you how quickly things could change. It just felt like everything that could go right did go right, and pretty much everyone across the board had like close to an A+ game for the Knicks.
Yeah, and crazy that on a night where Brunson got into foul trouble early, which is really uncharacteristic for him, and had to kind of take a seat early on in this game. Like caught his 4th foul in the second quarter in this one, which is not something that he's normally. That's more of a Cat trait than a Brunson trait. You know what I mean? And the fact that they were still able to, persevere through that, have some minutes where Deuce was like their de facto primary ball handler out there at times, and still managed to pull it together in those scenarios. I mean, I just thought this was as good of a game as you could have asked for given the circumstances, considering that, I mean, Brunson only played 25 and a half minutes in this game. Yeah. And Josh Hart, who's been, I mean, like having to play like 40 minutes most nights lately, even on the games where they're winning, like even the other night, like against the Kings, everybody else had to, it got sort of a night off, quote unquote, like around 30 to 35 minutes, and Hart still had to play 40. He gets some time off too, and they still squash like this. It's just crazy, crazy stuff.
Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. The one bet you could look at, $5 on the NBA tonight. The Lakers head east to play the Sixers. FanDuel likes LeBron and company and has LA favored by 4 in Philly. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus. FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59.
Art Rooney, the Steelers owner, finally spoke to media yesterday.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast.
All in all, not a huge wave day for Art Rooney. Granted, that's never really been his style, nor has it been the Steelers' style. But a few things that I thought were interesting to be acknowledged by Art Rooney. One, saying he understands why people are mad. He says all I can say is actions speak louder than words, and we've got to be better. And I hear that, but Alan, I think when people hear that, they're like, okay, so what are the actions? And he says, hey, we're sticking with Mike Tomlin. He's like, hey, don't expect wholesale changes in the coaching staff, but does acknowledge there will be some changes. What is your sense as far as like what are these actions that he plans to when he plans to be at the head of as the owner of the Steelers?
Well, I'm going to do this before I answer the question. And I'm just taking over, even though it's your podcast. But you have a little video game deal over your left shoulder there. I don't know what it is. It's always there.
Oh yeah, it's my Marvel versus Capcom mini console.
Airbnb has Buck Hunter Pro.
Oh
big
snap!
Buck Hunter Pro.
Oh snap!
So I just want to show off because right?
That's pretty cool.
Like
That's
that.
pretty cool.
Chris, Art Rooney said actions speak louder than words. And then said, "There's nothing I can do right now." Basically, I mean that's pretty much what he said. That the theory of what he said is the big problem with the Pittsburgh Steelers has been the inability to find a difference maker at the quarterback position, and there is not much hope for a change in that right now. And so I think if you believe that, then all you're doing is making change for the sake of making change. And I'm not saying that there isn't some value in that. Probably is. But I also can understand a lack of willingness to do that. So if Art Rooney really believes that the biggest problem with the Steelers is their inability to find a solution at the quarterback position, that they tried once on Kenny Pickett, didn't work out, and Art said there's nothing to be learned from that mistake, which I will disagree with, but I'll respect his answer. If he believes all that, well, then there isn't much he can do right now because there is no answer coming through that door quarterback better than Justin Fields or Russell Wilson in 2025. And there isn't a whole lot of reason to think that either of those guys are going to get the Steelers to where they want to be either.
And see, that's the thing here is that, like you said, it feels kind of stuck, right? Like you're talking, if he's talking about, hey, actions speak louder than words, he understands, but then he goes into like all the reasons why, like, listen, it's not going to change a lot right now. And to a degree here, you also understand it's not like he's speaking out one side of two sides of his face there. He's right. Like the Steelers, if they made wholesale, if they blew it up right now, fire the coaching staff, trade away TJ Watt, you're not okay. You do all that, you're still not getting the quarterback of your future right now, and then you become much worse. And then you can say, okay, maybe you can find him down the line, but then you throw away every chance to inherit for that quarterback that you eventually do go get down the line to inherit something that can be of a winning culture that can say, hey, you're inheriting a slightly above average team that can get to the playoffs. If you make them decidedly better, they become better than that, and then they are a more dangerous team. That's kind of what happened with Ben Roethlisberger when they got him. And granted, they were 6-10 the year that they got him, the year before they got him. So like it was a little different. But he inherited a team with a really good run game. He with a tough defense, with playmakers on offense, and it was a plug in the situation. And it was such a big lift from Tommy Maddox to him that they were 15-1 his first season, and they were immediately contenders in those years under Bill Cowher. And so that made for a thing there. I think the point that he's looking at here is like, look, like we know what the situation is. This is a quarterback-driven league, and we don't got the quarterback that drives. Now, we like the two guys that we got for now, and Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, and we'll get to that whole situation, how they talked about that, as well as his comments on Kenny Pickett. But all in all, I think his point is like, look, we know that we got to be better, but we also have to stay the course right now if you're the Steelers. And that's where I do agree in the sense that blowing up your attempt to become more like the way that the Eagles are building right now when you brought in Andy Weidel to help Omar Khan, that's not going to help you get to being like that team right now. And I think that is the ultimate point here is that, look, like I know Steelers fans are impatient because they haven't seen a playoff win since the 2016 season. But at the same time, you're not going to get one any faster by just hitting the reset button over and over and over again. And he also kind of made that point is that like the league averages anywhere from 6 to 8 new coaches a year. And that doesn't always lead to great results.
Yeah, I mean, look at the number of coaches that have been hired since, let's just say, since COVID, so 4 years. Like, how many of those guys worked out to be way better than Mike Tomlin? Like, is there one or two? Like, maybe, yeah, but like your chances are low. So, like, you're committing to probably doing that. Like, everyone likes to point out that the Eagles moved on from Andy Reid and then got back to the Super Bowl with Nick Sirianni. They don't like to point out that the first coach was a failure and they got worse in the interim. Like, so I think you have to look at the Steelers and say, okay, this is still a playoff team. They were 10-3 at one point. They probably underachieved on defense, given their talent level. Is this a team that it makes sense to blow up? Or is this a team where it makes more sense to do what you're talking about and just try to continue to incrementally get better until you are able to make that big splash at the quarterback position? You said they had to go. They went 6-10 when they drafted Ben Roethlisberger, but they picked him at 11. The Steelers have already traded up to 10.
Yeah,
not that long ago to go get Devin Bush. It's not that hard. It wasn't that painful to go make that trade. Like, you can go get your guy if he's there to be had. I think right now the problem is it's not there.
Yeah, this just isn't a quarterback draft year. This isn't the year to go get, Arch Manning or, whoever the big guy that you want next year. And maybe that is the thing. Maybe it's next year you want to be there. But as I've brought up before in the show, the Chiefs, when they went and got Patrick Mahomes, they were the second seed in the AFC. They traded up. They were 12-4 that season when they traded up to the 10th overall pick to get Patrick Mahomes. And granted, that don't always work, but you can do it, especially when you build an offensive line, playmakers into your offense, a defensive core, which that's what they're trying to get right now. They have a defensive core. They're trying to make sure that they have a good offensive line. They're trying to get better playmakers. I think that's the mission this year, is to set those things up and then have most of those heading in the right direction, and even to the point where they're proficient, so that when the quarterback comes in that you draft, and whether you want them to sit behind a year 3 Justin Fields or a year 3 Russell Wilson or whatever, you at least have something that they can inherit, that they're not coming in and having to make things up on the fly. Because whereas it really worked out for Jaden Daniels, that don't always work as we see in the NFL with young quarterbacks. Look at Caleb Williams and what he's dealing with, and what Ben Johnson's going to have to quickly turn around. And to your point about Andy Reid, and I brought this up on the Final Word Sunday night. People love to bring that analogy up, but they always leave out the part where Andy Reid left the Eagles, created maybe the greatest dynasty in football, because if they win a Super Bowl this year, they'll have won 4 in 6 years, which ties the Steelers in the 70s, which nobody had ever done. And by the way, if they win this Super Bowl, they will have beaten the Eagles, the team that let Andy Reid go. Could you imagine if Mike Tomlin was fired by the Steelers, created a 4 Super Bowl run for the Cowboys, and in the process beat the Steelers twice? This town would be livid with itself about that. So I'm not saying that, hey, if you fire Mike Tomlin, he's just going to win 4 Super Bowls somewhere else. But stop using the Andy Reid analogy. It's stupid.
I guarantee, like, If Andy Reid beats the Eagles in the Super Bowl again, and nobody in Philly can be walking around with their chest puffed out about how they successfully moved on from Andy Reid. None. Zero.
Yeah, it's just it's there, and like, look, if they win this time, great. You finally got one over him. He still created a 3-time Super Bowl champion dynasty, and Patrick Mahomes is still 29 years old.
Would you rather have Andy Reid or Nick Sirianni as your head coach right now?